the night I almost died. And I'm glad to be here because I did truly almost die. Like as I mentioned before, I went to college at Abilene Christian University. And I don't know if you've ever been to Abilene, but there's one thing that's true about Abilene. There is nothing to do in Abilene. There has never been anything to do in Abilene. I was there last week because my daughter was at camp, and I'm looking around and they built all of this other stuff, and there's more to do in Abilene now than there was when I went to school there, but there's still nothing to do in Abilene. I grew up in Atlanta. And my brother came to school here in Nashville, my older brother, which only proved to me that in this one single, very narrow way that my brother is actually smarter than I am. In no other way is he smarter than I am. And we used to say, like Lipscomb got the town, Abilene got the school. But I went to Abilene, and I was sitting around the dorm my junior year of college. And I was looking at my friends with nothing in the world to do. And we said, we should go do something. Which you would think that people who are 21 years old would come up with the idea that we should go and do something, and then go and do it. But it was like a revelation to us. But the thing is that we had heard that in a town about 30 miles from Abilene called Anson, that there was an old decommissioned bridge. So there's this old bridge that trains used to run across. They didn't use it anymore. And the reason that you had a bridge in that place was that you could jump into the lake underneath the bridge. And so, me and my friends decided what we ought to do on a Saturday night in boring Abilene was go and jump off a bridge. So when my parents asked me if your friends would jump off a bridge, would you do it too?
The answer is yes.
The answer is obviously yes. So we load up in 2 cars, we drive out very late at night, almost early in the morning. Are you okay? I mean, like, that might have been like some brain matter on that one. We need to stop, pray for you, get the paramedics in here. So my friends and I decided we're going to go jump off of this bridge. Which seems now safer than sneezing. So we drive out to this town, and we look around. It's like 1 in the morning, and it's very dark, no moon. We couldn't see anything. We think we found this bridge. And so we get out of our cars, and we walk to the middle of this bridge to go jump into the water underneath this bridge. But none of us had thought that, hey, if you're going to jump into a body of water, you might want to bring some clothes to jump into a body of water. Like load up a swimsuit, something like that. Take it with you. So we're just out there, we're a bunch of college guys, so we decide, okay, since we don't have clothes to get wet in, let's just get wet in no clothes. So we decide to come all of this way. We want to jump in this bridge. You see this picture of this bridge? It's late at night, and my friend, Sean, decides that he wants to go first. And we figured that he should go first, because he's the smallest. He's like this tall. He gets to the edge of the bridge, looks down into the water, and he jumps. We listen. And I don't know if we knew what we were listening for. Like a scream, a holler, death. We heard it. Splash. Well, that was good enough for the rest of us. So the rest of us take off our clothes and we just start jumping into this water. Just splash, splash, splash. Because we're in Abilene and there's not anything to do and and it seems like a good idea at the time. And then we find ourselves in the water, all together, underneath this decommissioned bridge, and no one knows where we are. No one will be able to find us. If something happened, we ran into a serial killer, we died, and our parents would be miserable forever, all because we were bored on a Saturday night in Abilene. And so as we're sitting in the water, it dawns on me, how do we get out of the water? Because we can't see anything. And on both sides, there's all of this growth and weeds, and there's no way to get out of it. Everything's muddy and nasty. But we notice that there is this long pipe that's coming into the water, that if we kind of like shimmy up the pipe, like just so, very carefully, we can finally get up far enough, high enough to get out of the water. But the problem is now, we're wet and we're muddy. And so my first friend goes up the pipe, very slow, and then the second. But every time somebody else goes up, it gets more muddy and wetter and nastier. And I am the last one. So, I start making my way up this pipe, out of this water, and I slip. I don't want to be too graphic, but I had one leg go on one side of the pipe.
Oh, my God.
What, you heard this before? I had another leg go on the other side of the pipe. And I'm here today to tell you, I have 2 daughters. And I am so grateful. So we decided, after I finally made it up the pipe, that we were done jumping off of old bridges. But we were still boys and still stupid. So we decided that we would drive back through town, and there was no one in this old town at all, but they had at the center of town this enormous courthouse. And in Anson, Texas, I bet every light in that town was painted toward that courthouse. Like it was lit up like the White House. I'd never seen anything so bright. And so I'm in the car in the back, and I've got 4 friends in the car ahead of me. And they ease up in front of the courthouse, and they stop their car, and I see one of my friends get out of the passenger side. Like we just finished getting dry, we're there, and he starts running toward the courthouse. And as he's running toward the courthouse, he starts taking off all of his clothes again. And starts running around the courthouse. And so the rest of us look at each other. And we think, hey, if your friends ran around a courthouse naked, would you do it too?
Maybe.
Yes! And the answer, apparently,
I said maybe.
so we all get out, start running around the courthouse. This serves no purpose at all. Like, I cannot imagine the phone call I would have had to make to my mother to explain to her that I'd been arrested in a small town in Texas for running around a courthouse at 1 in the morning with no clothes. Like, that's not something, like, no parent is prepared for that conversation. And that's just what we did. Because that's the kind of nonsense that we always do. We are much, much, much older now. And when we are together, we still do stupid stuff together. Those 5 guys in my life have been the church for me and the world for me. And we have lived through everything together. Through cancer, through divorces, through the deaths of parents, through children who were born with birth defects. through children who have suffered greatly, children with disease, all of that over those years. And those are always the people that I call first. About 10 years ago, there was a young Yale student named Maria Keegan. And Marina was about to graduate from Yale. She was a fabulous writer and wrote for the Yale student newspaper. And before she graduated, she left college with the thing that every parent wants their child to leave college with: a job. She was going to write for the New Yorker. And so she wrote this in the Yale newspaper the week before she graduated about her experience at Yale. It's on the screen. She says, "We don't have a word for the opposite of loneliness. But if we did, I could say that that's what I want in my life. What I'm grateful and thankful to have found at Yale, and what I'm scared of losing when we wake up tomorrow and leave this place. It's not quite love, and it's not quite community. It's just this feeling that there are people, an abundance of people, who are in this together, who are on your team. When the check is paid and you stay at the table. When it's 4 a.m. and no one goes to bed. That night with the guitar, that night we can't remember. That time we did, we went, we saw, we laughed, we felt. The hats. Yale is full of tiny circles we pull around ourselves. A cappella groups, sports teams, houses, societies, clubs. These tiny groups that makes us feel loved and safe and part of something even on our loneliest nights when we stumble home to our computers, partnerless, tired, awake. We won't have those next year. We won't live on the same block as all of our friends. We won't have a bunch of group texts. This scares me. More than finding the right job or city or spouse, I'm scared of losing this web we're in, this elusive, indefinable opposite of loneliness, this feeling I feel right now. We don't have a word for the opposite of loneliness. But if we did, I'd say that's how I feel at Yale, how I feel right now here with all of you, in love, impressed, humbled, scared, and we don't have to lose that. We're in this together. 2012. Let's make something happen to this world. 5 days later, after Marina Keegan wrote that in the Yale newspaper, she was killed in a car wreck. But from that essay, what she wrote touches on something that for me is so deep and profound and hard. And maybe it might be the biggest challenge of living right now. It's that for people my age and for people your age and everybody in between, the one thing I know is that everyone is scared to death of being alone. And the reason I know this is because we try so hard to not be alone. To feel like there's someone there, like there's someone who cares, who knows us, who sees us. That's why we do all the silly things that we do. Like, that's why we're on Instagram and TikTok. It's the feeling that if I have another follower, if I have another fan, if someone else notices me, then maybe I won't feel alone. And what everyone else won't tell you that they feel just the same way you do is that nobody wants to be alone. We make choices of who to date and how to spend our money and where to go and who we're friends with. And what's driving all of those choices is our great fear of being alone. And there's actually nothing worse than being alone. So when God creates the world in 6 days and rests on the seventh day, everything is just clicking along, until he creates man, and he looks at man and he goes, oh, that's not good. Like, he's alone. And I discovered discovered this when my oldest daughter, was in the first grade. We were living in California, in Silicon Valley, and she was out of school there with just the most ridiculous people in the world. Like one of her classmates' dad was vice president at Amazon, another was the CEO of Shutterfly, all of these incredibly wealthy people. And she was in the school, she got into that school, not because we had any money, but because she was like really smart. And she's always had this incredible heart for people and justice. And when she was in the first grade, there was a girl in her class who was being mistreated. And she was strange and awkward. And she was the kind of girl that's an easy target for people who want to be mean. And Malia, my daughter, stood up for her in class. So much so that the girl's parents called us that night and she said, I want to get to know you because I want to know the parents of who could raise a child like that. And they ended up becoming some of our best friends. They became part of our church. But what that did cost her. And all of the other kids in the class kind of left her out, excluded her, mocked her. And I remember dropping her off at school one day, and the kids were all playing together, and she was walking around in a circle, talking to herself, and she was saying, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. And I've never been more heartbroken in my life, because I knew that I had taken her to a place where she was alone. And so much of the difficulty that we face is because we live in loneliness. Four years ago, we were on family vacation in Colorado, and my wife had decided that we were going to go to Colorado and do it on a road trip. I was going to Colorado to do one thing. I was going to speak at this thing. My idea was I would get on a plane, I would fly to Colorado, I would do my thing, and I would come home. But she decides, let's all go. So we all go. And she can't just drive to Colorado. She has to have all of these little stops along the way. And one of the things that she found was a wolf preserve, where you could just kind of go and hang out with wolves. And I told her, that is a thing that white people do. Black people do not go hang out with wolves.
That's what I was thinking about.
We have seen movies. I'm not hanging out with a wolf. It's just, don't you want to be in a place where you can pet wolves? No, I have never wanted to be in a place where I can pet wolves.
Preach.
Why do you want to be in a place where you can pet wolves? But when you get there, you have to drive up this canyon, like on the side of the mountain. And we had this SUV, and the road was barely bigger than our car. And the higher you got to go to the wolf reserve, the foggier it got. It was hard to see. And she's driving at this point and just like white-knuckled, trying to keep us on the road because on the other side of the mountain, like if she goes like just a foot off the road, like out of the lane, like we all just fall over and die. But now it's hard to see because the fog is so thick. And she says, like, aren't you worried that we're going to die? And I told her, everybody that I love is in this car. There's something. It's just the way that we're wired. That eases and soothes when we're in the difficult circumstances, when we are in the worst part of our lives. We don't have to do it alone. When we get to be together, when we get to be with someone. There's a great little story tucked in the end of Matthew's Gospel. And at this point in the life of Jesus, like he's done all of his teaching, all of his healing, he's gone to the cross, he's been resurrected, and he's spent time with the disciples after the resurrection. And now he's going to ascend, go back to the Father. And he gives his disciples just some parting words, some things to think about as he's going on his way. And when you hear it, you're going to think to yourself, oh, I've heard that before. Like, I know that part. Because there are two parts of this, and there's one part that we talk about a lot. That if you've been around church or a youth group any in your life, you've heard people talk about this. And there's another part of that we never talk about at all. And so when Jesus is getting ready to go to the Father, this is what Matthew tells us about that story in Matthew 28. It says, now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but they doubted. I want to get this straight. They're still his disciples, but they doubted. Which means that you can still doubt and still be a disciple. And Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. Now that's the part you know. Because someone in your life at some point came around and said, you know what your job is? Like, to make disciples. You know what you should do to make disciples? With your friends, you know what you need to be talking about? Disciples. You need to be a better disciple. We need more disciples. They talk about disciples all the time. At least when I go around places, people are always talking about discipleship. I hear that part all the time. But then Jesus says this, and remember, I am with you always, to the end of the age. That's the part that not too many people talk about. Mostly because a lot of us have trouble with prepositions. Because when we talk about God and life with God, we talk about some things that are only partially true. But you've probably heard people talk about this one. They've probably talked about life under God. And what they mean when they say life under God is that God is powerful and sovereign and in charge. God's in control. Like, I always know that I'm dealing with a life under God person, like when they pray, if they're like a holy God prayer, where like every 3 words they say holy God. Like, we love you, holy God. Thank you for this day, holy God. We love holy God, holy God, holy God. Like, that's like their rhythm. But life under God is this: God tells you what to do, and you obey. You don't think about it, you don't question it, you just do it. And so many of the people that I know whose primary idea of who God is that they are under God, so many of those people, they're just mean. Because their God is mean. Their God doesn't really care about anything except people following rules and obeying. And so anytime they're in charge of even the littlest thing, they think that's how other people ought to behave too. Just be under me. Listen to me. These are the folks who, when you have a good question, they say, because I said so. And it's not that we don't live under God. That's only part of the story. And then you've got a whole different set of people who believe that life is over God. And haven't we really just answered all of the big questions? And if we haven't yet, we eventually will. Like, there's always going to be some reasonable explanation, some scientific explanation. And everybody else that came before us, maybe 100 years ago, or 1,000, or 2,000, or 5,000, or 10,000 years ago, all those people are really stupid. And we've got so much technology now, we know so much, that we really don't need God for anything. So we just kind of tell God to go away someplace. And we don't really need you. We're over you, God. And it's not that we haven't learned anything, or that fields of study like science don't matter. And they teach us things and help us refine our thinking. But that's only a part of it. And then you've got folks who primarily see God as life from God. Like that God is sort of like a cosmic butler. And that maybe if we say the right prayers, or read the right things, or go to the right church, if we are obedient enough, God's job really is to just give us the stuff that we want. And how could a God who loves us not give us things that we love? So what we do is we turn God just into someone who will just give us what we need, what we want. We just want life from God. And there's a part of that that's true too. That the scriptures do say that one of the reasons we walk closely with God is so that it will go well, that life will go well with us. That's only partial. But when Jesus talks to his disciples, he doesn't primarily say the relationship that he wants with his disciples is life under them or over them, or he's going to give life from them. The word Jesus uses is with. That God is with you. What would you do if you believed that God was with you? What would you not do if you believed that God was with you? That is not a puppet for you to control and not domineering and mean, but really with you. Those really difficult choices. Those seasons of life, whether it's with a friend or with a parent. I remember so clearly being 15 years old and my mom coming into my room one morning. I had an algebra test, and her saying, "You can sleep in today. You don't have to go to school." Which is amazing, because I did not miss a single day of school from kindergarten all the way through 9th grade. She says, "Your dad and I are going to get a divorce this morning." That story is not unique to me. Just about everyone has experienced something along the way. But what you need more than anything is to remember and to know that God is with you. Right here. Whatever brought you here tonight, whatever you're going back home to at the end of your time, God's with you. There's probably not anything more powerful that you can offer to your friends, your siblings, than to be with them. Several years ago, I read the story of a woman named Antonia Brenner, Sister Antonia. She was born Mary Clark, but after her children, all 7 of her children, grew up and moved off, and after 2 divorces, she decided that she would become a nun. But because she had been divorced twice, there was no sisterhood that would take her. And Mary Clark had lived in Southern California. She was an extraordinarily wealthy woman. She was a Southern California socialite. All of the things that you think of about rich people living in Southern California, and she became a nun. And so, since she couldn't join an order to become a nun, she decided that she would start her own. And she focused all of her attention on prisoners and the underprivileged. And late in life, she decided that she would leave Southern California and move to Tijuana, Mexico, where she worked in La Mesa prison, which is the worst prison in Mexico. It is the place where they send all of the drug lords and rapists and gang members, murderers. And that's where she worked. And over time, all the inmates there came to love and know Sister Antonia. The guards were naturally distrustful of the prisoners didn't trust the guards, and she became a go-between between the two, helping them talk to one another. But one year she decided that she would take a break and go back to Southern California to visit some family. And while she was gone, while she was away in Southern California, a riot broke out at the prison. Multiple guards were killed. The prison was set on fire. The warden pulled out all of the guards, and the prisoners took over. And as soon as Sister Antonia heard about the riot in the prison, she left Southern California and went back to Mexico. She met with the guard, met with the warden, and pleaded for them to let her in. And they said no. It was too dangerous. She would get killed. Things were on fire. And slowly, over time, she talked them into it. When Sister Antonia entered the prison, she began to walk through the cell block, just calling out names. And as the prisoners heard their names being called, they threw down their weapons and they came out. And one of the prisoners told her, "Sister, as soon as we heard your voice, we knew it was time to come out." And just like that, the riot was over. And here's what the warden says about Sister Antonia. He said the reason that she was able to stop the riot was that for 30 years, after she spent time in counseling groups and meeting one-on-one with inmates, instead of going to her house in suburban Tijuana, she walked down the cell block and entered into her 15 by 15 cell, and that's where she lived. She was with them. And here's what I want you to know. I don't have the first clue, the first idea of what your life is like or what you have been through, what's coming up for you, what is giving you anxiety. I don't know about your friends or your school or your stress or your parents or your brothers or your sisters. I do know this, that in the worst of it, when nothing seems to be the way that you would want it to be, the thing that you can know right now is God is with you. Let me pray for you. God, the fact